Well, thank you, friends. We appreciate you joining us today. I hope everyone's having a good time at East Denver. We wanted to have a conversation today. I brought up these brilliant minds here because what we saw in the last couple of years has been a really, to me, startling move. We've seen a progression in the way that media is treating the truth in the world. And we've seen some really interesting things happening in terms of where the source of truth comes from and what that means for control and openness. And obviously, this community cares a lot about trust and transparency. So each of these people are doing something really interesting to make sure that the world is a freer place. And we're going to start the conversation with Daniel, who is talking about, has been focusing on some technology that could actually support more trust and open the world from censorship. So Daniel, you want to talk at a high level about some of those ideas?
Yeah. When you think about censorship and community, what's happening is everything we're doing is becoming more centralized. So you have to agree a lot more and more. So the amount that we agree upon is very little, and we're not allowed to have private conversations anymore. Everything is like a global, national, kind of conversation. So I think the key is building a communications protocol that really just acknowledges that I'm okay and you're okay. We don't really have to acknowledge much beyond that. And I think what's really interesting about Bitcoin is there's more agreeance on that than I think any other single concept out there. I think it probably has the largest mind share of just agreeance. Like we can calculate that these coins are where they are. So I think a communication layer apart from the Web2 world, the FANGs, right? Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Microsoft. If you can't work with Microsoft or Google, you don't get email. And so Web3 doesn't really have that communication layer, but I think when that's designed, that will unlink, all of the Discord servers. They can just turn you off. All of the email providers can turn you off. And then Telegram's still Signal's still very bound to the phone number as well. So I know they're making advances, but yeah.
Very cool. John, you are part of a project that is doing some interesting things in terms of giving people a town square in a way that has never been decentralized before.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I was involved in the internet in the early days, and the promise of the internet was open and free information. And over the last couple of years, I've been kind of concerned as I see more, and it's actually being used as a tool against us with algorithms and these bubbles. We're kind of putting everybody into the same filter bubble. And so I started getting involved in a program called Free Roots. I was brought on as an advisor to this company. And it was about a grassroots movement to get civic action, to bring about changes. So it wasn't all based on Twitter, it wasn't all based on email. It was basically a way that you could go on, you could notify your senators, your congressmen, you could sign a petition, you could put it on Facebook, Twitter, and basically these things, so they were running these campaigns. They did one last week, and it was 25 million actions in 1 week. So that shows that people really tapped in. Now some of these campaigns, if it was run on Twitter, it would have been shadow banned, nobody would have seen it, it would have been invisible. So this is a way to kind of break the censorship, but this is on a Web2 platform. So they kind of, they contacted me and said, hey, we're getting hacked. When something comes out that really gets somebody's attention, we're getting hacked. We had to bring in people to fortify their system because they're pissing off the wrong people. So we said, we really need to port this to a Web3. So right now we're working on taking that architecture, taking all that success that they have and moving it to a Web3 environment where nobody can take it down.
Which is awesome. And Max has just completed a book that is really beautifully talking about how Web3 goes so far beyond the technology itself and is an ethos that's really a message that needs to be shared more broadly.
Yeah, and if you were at my talk earlier, I went into some depth about it. I want to acknowledge though that so I guess the way I've been thinking about this particular problem is the idea of truth claim. And we can go to philosophical depths very quickly, but the point is that no one can stand outside of him or herself or theirselves to be able to limn the ultimate nature of reality. That is a philosophical problem that has been with us for a very long time. So what we have to do is communicate through rational discourse, using our rationality, and provide some evidentiary means for a truth claim. What's great about the geeks here, the people who are really into this stuff, is that you can figure out on-chain mechanisms for adjudicating truth claims using evidence and provenance associated with that evidence. So what's so promising about what you guys are doing is not just censorship resistance, which is kind of baked into digital ledgers and that sort of stuff, and that's a good thing, but also the idea that you can start to create incentives. One of the reasons we have so much pollution in the landscape out there for information is because there's not very much of a high cost for being wrong. So if you can create systems where people can introduce evidence and support their claims, and there's a higher cost of being wrong, that would be wonderful. However, you have to acknowledge the GameStop problem, what I call the GameStop problem. And I think you all know what I mean, which is that you can get hordes of people, you can get a hive mind that's betting on something that's not true. And of course, I'm not assuming that I have limbed the ultimate nature of reality through my brain. It's just that there is never a way to stand outside of the matrix of intersubjectivity. And by subjectivity, I mean the way I perceive something, the way you perceive something can be different, but we're trying to find intersubjective agreement about some truth claim. The extent to which we can develop markets of doing this, sort of like prediction markets, sort of like futarchy. How many of you have ever heard of futarchy? Sort of like that. If you've never heard of it, follow up with me. I'm happy to send you some stuff. But it's really hard to stop the GameStop problem. The idea that you can just, get a bunch of people together and will some truth claim at the end of some time horizon. So I'm seeing this as a big problem. I don't want to get too weird and technical, but I think if anybody can solve for that problem, or at least get us halfway there with evidence that makes it sting to be wrong, right? Where you're putting your money where your truth claim is, and that may involve staking or whatever, that we can at least get closer to tracking truth. Because a lot of these claims that we are adjudicating are just, as John put it, as a war of filter bubbles, right? And we come with our predetermined biases, and we have to learn. So we have to discipline ourselves to become more rational, engage in better rational discourse, learn to evaluate data and inputs from reality, such as they are, and do that. We've got to discipline ourselves in that way. There's technology that can help us level up in that regard, but otherwise we've just got to learn to do that better as individuals. After that, going to the systems level, you guys are going to create that future, and I can't wait to see it.
I know you have something to say. Daniel, I'm sure you have a wonderful follow-up, because thank you, Max. That was amazing.
Yeah, I think about the quest for absolute truth, and that's an interesting way to go. But what I think is happening is we're introducing markets more and more into our interactions with each other. And by introducing markets, you're going to come up with this this ability to do a GameStop-style play. And so markets are also a strategy game, and because the hedge fund strategy was well understood, the GameStop strategy was able to work. At some point, that strategy will have a counter and a counter. But now we have market dynamics regulating our interactions with each other, as opposed to, and the problem with the market dynamics is, when you're in smaller communities, you have a range, and we calibrate all of our thinking based on range. Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow, they talk about how when you would show people higher numbers, they'd be willing to pay more, and you show them lower numbers, and then they pay less. So I've thought about the news thing, and I think there should be, I think one of the most amazing tech is ERC20, because there's over 500,000 just on the Ethereum chain alone, and they all work with all the wallets. And some of these do wildly different things, and others keep it very simple just by following the 8 key methods. So I think about COVID, and I think about how when COVID started, it was deaths, and then it became hospitalizations, and then it became case count, and we just kept moving, and you could never comprehend the scale of the numbers. So what if we had an ERC 20 standard for especially public policy, public health kind of things that the author could put in the bottom to normalize this, so that you don't come and feel like, because we've all done, again, when you zoom in on markets too, think about your view as a trader on the 6 hour versus the lifetime, and we've lost that. We don't have that zoom, so we can't understand the market that we're dealing with. I hope that makes sense.
No, that's great. And what we saw during COVID was one of the reasons that I think this conversation is so important. Without even being woo, we were watching people get taken off of YouTube for recommending taking vitamin D. Like very simple things we were watching get censored. And I think it's really important that this community starts pioneering some of the things that are going to be solutions to this, to making sure that we are able to share information with each other and it's not decided for us. And John, you're doing some really interesting things with global leaders to make sure that we promote this.
Yeah, sometimes I think they're the problems, but that's no. So when we look at like you're saying, the GameStop issue, where you have people banding together to change the truth or reality, I think that's a problem. But I'm more worried about the control structures that people have. The 0.1% of the population that has most of the wealth, that wants to control us and control what we think and control what we see. And when you look at what's happening, they have financial interest in the media. The media, different people in different areas see different things depending on what the media wants them to see. Or as we were talking about yesterday, depending on who you are searching Google, you'll see different results. So they're deciding what you see, and that reflects how you debate and how you discuss things with people. And I come from DC. I have a lot of friends that are in the military, some people in 3-letter agencies, and there's something called a PSYOP. If you went to school to get involved in a warfare, a lot of what we do now is psychological operations. When you look at what they do and how they do it, a lot of it is, it's not about facts, it's about emotions. How do you get people emotionally charged? And when people become emotionally charged on an issue, the logic and the critical thinking goes out the door. And that's a really vicious cycle, and that causes people to go further. And what happened now, most people have issues in families and friends where you're now divided over different issues. And it's easy to think that's organic, but it's not organic. There's people that want that division, that want to control you, and for financial gain or control. And a lot of that is planned out. There's textbooks that are written on how to do this, and most of us didn't take those classes, so we don't realize what's going on. But I had some discussions with some people that were involved in those operations, and you'd say, well, what's happening now? Doesn't that kind of seem like a PSYOP? And they kind of say, yeah, it kind of does.
I want to just riff on this because it's absolutely a good point. If you want to look it up, there's a really good essay by a guy named Jordan Hall called "Understanding the Blue Church." And the idea of the blue church is this control structure, this hierarchical apparatus that has pretty much held sway since the medieval times, when the church gave you all of the morality and it gave you all of the knowledge. The scribes in the church were the same people who were, meant to administer morality, and this was hierarchical. The medieval form, right? The medieval guilds were structured in very much this way. Well, so now you have this thing called the mainstream media. And the mainstream media used to be a bunch of reporters, right? And these reporters it wasn't seen as it being a job that was any different from, driving a truck or doing whatever. It was like you're a reporter and you're a cub reporter or you're a beat reporter. You do your thing, you ask a bunch of questions, you try to verify it 2 or 3 different ways. But slowly with time, the control structure there was this strange attractor. Control structure of journalism got taken into the control structure of the blue church, which is basically the idea that knowledge should be understood and disseminated by elites. So right opinion came out of higher education, right opinion came out of ABC, NBC, and CBS, right opinion, good opinion came out of, and so on. And so you got this gravitational pull into this hierarchical control structure. And I think the Blue Church apparatus is a really good description of it. If you want to see Understanding the Blue Church, it's an article you can Google. Or not Google, pre-search. I prefer pre-search. More on that later. And interestingly, what we're seeing now is that there is a status associated with that. My new friend Lisa reminded me of this in conversation just a little while ago, that it's not just that they're losing money, that the mainstream media organizations that are hierarchically arranged are losing resources to indie media folks. So then they go over and say, okay, we're losing our asses to indie media. Who's got the indie media? Big tech. So they have learning that they need to collude and moralize with big tech in order to maintain that power. And now, of course, we're seeing stuff like Jen Psaki come out and say, so we're working with Facebook to snuff out disinformation. Woo, you want to talk about an affront to the First Amendment? Yes, they're private companies, but let me tell you, the veiled threat of we're gonna mess you up and your hierarchical organization up if you don't play ball is just as good as censorship by proxy. So it doesn't matter what team you play on, red, blue, left, right, whatever that old bullshit is. The problem is, it doesn't matter. Once someone commandeers the wheels of authority at the very top, their interests hold sway. So the decentralization space is going to really give rise to a whole bunch of, let's call them, I don't know, a hive mind that wants to understand the world and share information. And yes, there's going to be a lot of garbage on YouTube and on Facebook, and people are going to share stuff that's wrong and inaccurate and all that stuff. But I say that is better than this Blue Church apparatus, this hierarchical control structure that is somehow anointed as clean and fresh smelling and gives us the right and the good. That is a terrible and dangerous idea. The idea of a monopoly on truth is wrong and it's dangerous. And you're absolutely right. We gotta fight back against that.
Well, and amen. One of the things that we talk a lot about in this space is the fact that, you know, we're getting rid of gatekeepers, right? We've done studies, we've seen that there is a dopamine cycle that happens when you have a little bit of power over people that then becomes reinforcing. And so then people keep trying to find it. And Max, you said in your talk this morning, talking about when power, you know, when you have absolute power and it corrupts absolutely, we keep ending up with these systems. And something that I've taken from you is talking about how it's not the person in the office that's the problem, it's the office. Like what we have built is now enforcing these kinds of things. And, you know, Marshall McLuhan, who you quote quite often, talks about how we shape our tools, but our tools shape us. And thinking about how much the cell phone has changed the way that you communicate with people. Thinking about what peer-to-peer technology is going to do in terms of changing the way that we interact with each other and take some of that power back. And Daniel, you've got some really interesting ideas in the way that different kinds of, you know, like going back to the church and different kinds of authority are shifting now. Do you want to riff on any of that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about really what's, when you talk about the media, everybody says, oh, they used to have all this power and everything because we had, geographical monopolies for every newspaper, right? So they were local monopolies. And at the time, they made more money by selling a center of the country opinion. But what happened is, as we move into personalization, our individual ideas are allowed to go, and that mass center disintegrates, so you can't have the mass media-style businesses. And then the hyper-personalization is coming in, but we continue to have the ability to actually express ourselves more, but they keep trying to shape us back into that better business model overall. And but all of this, you know, knowledge and the way that people report could be put into a graph. And once you have a graph, I think about, you know, the knowledge stored in like the root structures of trees and mycelium. They have, you know, the ages that it took to reach that agreement and knowledge. And since we're having to remap how we understand facts and how we understand things, because there is such a diversity of opinion and mental models working, I think that's going to be a really hard step. But the thing that makes it harder is we're seeing an uncoupling of church, and we saw church and state, and that caused a revolution where now it's money and state are being uncoupled as well, and they're not very comfortable with that. And then really large corporate and federalism are merging together as well, which is an unfortunate bond, because the government has been kept from doing so many things, but they're willing to trade power for influence into the private sector. Hey, maybe you can delete these bank accounts. Maybe you can censor these people. You know, we can't do it because we've got the First Amendment and all these other things, but you can because you're a private corporation. So, you know, I think that was a threat model that wasn't modeled for in the Constitution, and we should update that to keep the power distributed. So yeah.
Our friend Rick Burton said something the other day. He was talking about how we have open source technology, but what if we had open state? What if we had the community's eyes on some of the algorithms that they're using and the technology that's happening, that's running most of our lives that we don't get to see?
Yeah, I think the key is being able to bring your own whatever. So, you know, I would love to have, if we had a common data standard for news articles, then I would build myself, because I'm a software developer, a little bot that would calibrate based on what I know, and it would help me to quickly collate and have almost a color where I would know coming into this article how much I trust this person. And I think that journalists can then build independent, you know, blockchain reputations, if you will, or records where people can go back and, you know, you start putting predictions into a common format. You can see how accurate they are in their prediction rate, because, you know, nobody ever goes back and checks anything. But by building the protocol hooks, and there's a lot of builders here, that's why I keep going to practical, what we should build. By putting this data here, you can create the knowledge graphs needed to help scale and help us to familiarize ourselves while allowing ourselves to individuate more, if that makes sense.
It does. Well, and one of the things that I really love about decentralist conferences is that the people in the audience are just as smart as the people on stage. So if our friend Joel wouldn't mind opening this up, if people have questions, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, make you run around a bit, but I would love to hear from you guys as well, unless you guys want to keep riffing, and we can keep this on.
Hey. Hi, Shannon.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Thanks for creating a space for this very important conversation that we're having here. So for me, it all starts with the user. I'm going to actually start calling them humans to give them, you know, a face and a voice. So 2 billion humans roughly show up every day to get truth and to have a voice. And in over 2 decades, they haven't had those things. And, you know, they might be at the point where they don't think they even deserve those things, right? And so the question is, before we start building a lot of things to sort of root ourselves, you know, in the humans that our software serves, how do we get people back in touch with the power of their voice and the power of truth?
Let's take that one.
Well, you know, I can see with this platform that I was involved in, when you can get 25 million actions, and that's 25 million reaching out to a senator or signing a petition, and the thing spreads virally. It shows that people out there want it. And what's fascinating is that's even with when stuff gets posted on Twitter, it gets canceled, it gets shadow banned. So that could be even much higher if the shadow banning and that censorship wasn't occurring. So I think people want to have a voice, and I do agree. I think there's a lot of people that are demoralized. And there's also what's fascinating is some people don't even realize that their voice isn't being heard because the shadow banning. They put something out there and nobody sees it, and they don't even know that. And that's a pretty scary thing. And you said yesterday, I mean, they're controlling what we see, what other people see, and that's, you know, what their impressions are. And so.
Okay, so I really want to congratulate you, not to abound in that, but there's 3 basic threats which are already upon us right now. One of them is the FATF's recommendations, the infrastructure bill, and right now I just lost my train of thought with the other one. CBDC's the upcoming announcement that the US is already working on its CBDC. If any of those 3 things go through, much of what everybody in this conference is working on much of what everybody else here believes in is going to go down the drain. How do we fight that, which is just like right around the corner?
Yeah, I mean that's, and again, this platform we're working on, and actually the code name for the Web3 version is Victory, and you know it's really about citizen engagement and citizen action. How can you actually let your senators know, let your congressmen know, and it works. I mean, when these people start getting bombarded in phone calls, they actually change their opinion. But there's, like we're seeing in Canada right now, I mean, it's frightening, right? What's going on, and that's, you know, you don't comply your way out of tyranny. So we have some really dangerous things going on, and we have to, I think we all have to get our voices heard and stand up. And in these bills, what's really scary is the infrastructure bill, they slip in some very dangerous laws that take away more and more of our freedoms, and people just don't realize that's going on.
I want to turn this back onto you and everyone else in the room, which is to say, you guys tell us. You're going to have to build you guys are going to have to build our way out of this. It's that serious.
What do we battle right now? An organization against the infrastructure bill.
Yeah,
Right now.
yeah. I mean, because I would take it a step further. We have to get more comfortable with with ideas that are more than just to oblige through phone calls and messages people in power, whose power, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely arbitrary. I don't want to play that game anymore. And we need an army of people who are completely unwilling to play that game anymore, because we're creating our own parallel institutions, and it's going to get uncomfortable. It's going to get hard. But I think we have to do it, and we have to take risks doing it. Watching those truckers, I'm sorry, I know you might call me I don't know, whatever that they're using to disparage those truckers. Right. But what I'm arguing for is the foundations of human freedom and association, and I think that transcends appeals to these powerful bureaucrats who are the problem. So we are engaged in a kind of an invisible war right now for those rights that must be built. We cannot hope that they're just going to grant them to us by virtue of some abstract constitution or something. We're just going to have to build it in parallel. And I'm counting on you guys, because I'm not the geek. I'm the philosopher. I can just stand by and go, can you build this? You know.
All right, we have time for one last quick question.
So you're talking about the need for censorship-resistant media platforms, but how would you address the problem of illegal content, which would be likely prime, point for shutting them down and just getting them out?
You're always going to have illegal content and spam and those kinds of things. So you have to approach it from a two-prong approach. One, you have an application layer. Two, you have the protocol layer. The protocols can defend that by creating spam taxes, algorithms that figure out, these are duplicates and stuff like that. But by and large, that protocol should remain open and free, because without it, it's why anybody here can go mint an NFT. There's no Apple catalog to put your music in. There's no, Google Play Store. Then on the application level, I think most users would want to filter that out, so the applications could then implement the kinds of filtering. But I go back to the concept of bring your own, where you should have a personal, almost bot that gives your preferences, on how you want to see the content, because that's a personal thing. But you can never stop copies and counterfeits from being made, Yeah.
I would love to hear from anyone here, perhaps afterwards, about the state of the art with respect to the decentralized web and mesh networking capabilities, where we are with that, getting away from sort of client-server model, as well as throughput with respect to these, because they're going to have to be low touch, low bandwidth in these nascent networks, whereas blockchains, first layer stuff is really, really heavy and difficult in these nascent non-server based networks, as I understand it. And correct me if I'm wrong, techies, I'm sure you can. But the way I understand it is we need to be able to network with each other such that these centralized entities don't control the pipes. And we got to get to that stage too.
All right, that's all we have time for.